Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new edition of Roadmap. We want to begin with a powerful image, and one that we have to warn you some might consider disturbing. It's of 3-year-old Aylan Kurdi washed up on the shore of a Turkish beach, shocked and saddened the world last week, drawing attention to a migrant and refugee crisis driven by conflict, persecution, and poverty. A total of 21,500 refugees entered Germany this past weekend alone, with 4,400 arriving in Munich on Monday alone. Many of those, like Aylan and his family, are from Syria, which has experienced a mass exodus of its population since the start of the country's civil war. The arrival of the refugees has caused some in Europe to rise up in support of the migrants. The outpouring of generosity from Germans has won the hearts of many of the tired travelers making their journey for a better life. In Iceland, a Facebook campaign that has gained the support of some 17,000 people has caused the government to rethink its refugee policy. In contrast, the crisis has caused other countries to tighten its borders further. Hungarian President Viktor Orban has announced fresh efforts to complete a fence to keep refugees out. Migrants received a frosty reception in the Czech Republic, where police could be seen marking people's hands with numbers, and Slovakia's clear indication last month that it would only receive Christian migrants highlighted what some claim is anti-Muslim sentiment that has spread across Europe in the past years. Critics say the crisis was self-inflicted by Western countries, by a byproduct of the failure to reach a political solution for the Syrian conflict that has now dragged on for many years. As European countries deal with its worst refugee crisis since World War II, this is a defining moment for the European Union. But the 28-nation bloc remains deeply divided, and the flow of migrants doesn't appear to be slowing down anytime soon. Joining me now to discuss this is research associate at the University of London, Lina, Khatib, and foreign affairs reporter for The Washington Post, Ishaan, Tharoor. Thank you very much both for joining us. So, Lina, let me start off with you and get a European perspective on this. It seems that in the past week or so, as this story has exploded onto international media, that there has been a different response from different governments, as we just highlighted.
Now, Germany, for example, has been very positive in saying that it's a country that can certainly absorb a large flow of migrants. It's a multicultural society. It's an economy that is in need of a workforce, and therefore the flow of migrants can contribute positively to it, whereas unfortunately other countries in Europe seem to believe that this flow of migrants would upset the social balance, which of course is something that the EU should, I think, be very decisive about.
And Ishaan, you recently wrote a article in which you compare
has activated a latent xenophobia in parts of Europe. There are, a whole slate of right-wing, far-right, nationalist parties that have, grandstanded on the issue of Muslim immigration for quite some time now. And this fits into a long-standing discourse within Europe. The point comparing sort of the current moment to 1930s Europe is not to say that German Jewish refugees of the 1930s and Syrian refugees and other migrants now sort of are exactly the same. The point is that the attitudes that the ways that they were received carry certain echoes. For example, then as in now they were viewed as economic threats in certain European countries. Then as in now they were viewed as harbingers of...
Are they leaving?
Well, according to UNHCR data, I think of the current flows into Europe right now, a good more than 50% to 60% are from Syria. Now, this Syria, as we all know, is a country that's been ravaged by war. 4 million Syrians have been forced to leave the country. Nearly half the population, around 11 million people, have been displaced by the conflict. This is a huge crisis, and a whole host of countries on Syria's borders can't really cope with this flow. And of course, then tens of thousands of Syrians living in very dire conditions elsewhere, in Lebanon and Turkey and elsewhere, have been compelled to make the move towards Europe. And this flow is compounded by Eritreans, Afghans, and many others from other parts of the world that are also, in the midst of conflict as well. So the distinction between refugees and migrants is important. Refugees, as many would already have sense, which, connoting that they're just there for economic reasons.
Do you think that Western countries have had a role to play in the escalating Syrian refugee crisis? And does that mean that they have a burden of responsibility in dealing with the outflow of refugees from that particular conflict?
Well, it's not just the West, yes.
Sorry, I was posing that question to Lina. I'll come back to you in just a second for your thoughts. Sure. But Lina, go ahead.
Sure.
Yes, absolutely. We have to remember why these migrants are coming to Europe now. As has just been pointed out, a lot of them are coming not straight from Syria. They are coming straight from Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, countries to which they had fled, thinking that this would be a temporary situation until they back to why this conflict has continued to grind on. And that is because the international community has not been active in terms of finding a settlement to the Syrian conflict. So, of course, the West plays a huge role and bears a huge responsibility in why the migrants are in this state today.
And Ishaan, let me ask you about the criticism that has been directed towards some of the wealthy countries, the Gulf countries, particularly Saudi Arabia and other Gulf allies. They're being criticized for not doing enough, actually even not doing anything for the resettlement of Syrian refugees. First of all, is that a fair criticism to say that some Gulf countries, Arab countries, are not doing anything or not doing enough to help resettle the Syrian population in their own neighborhood? And why aren't they doing more?
Well, the criticism that was leveled by a number of international organizations, Amnesty International, other rights groups, starting last week, was that these Gulf states were some of the wealthiest countries in the Arab world, and in the whole world per capita altogether, were not doing enough at all to take in new inflows of Syrian refugees. Some of these countries contend that they have taken hundreds of thousands of Syrians. These Syrians, though, are just not classified as refugees on their books, so it's hard to tell who's there for jobs and who's there because of the current conflict. It's certainly fair to say that, given the fact that a lot of these Gulf states aren't totally innocent bystanders in the conflict, they've played a role in either fueling it or in some ways sort of are part of the strategic paralysis that currently governs the situation. That they could be doing more. They could be making it easier for Syrians to travel and get visas to get out and go to these countries. They could be more proactive in helping and sort of transport Syrian refugees from certain places. But at the same time, it's a crisis that's on the shoulders of the whole international community. And the Gulf states are stakeholders in the region who should be playing a bigger role.
And finally, let me ask you, Lina, in terms of what a political and humanitarian solution could look like, do you see a possible outcome for these migrants and refugees in Europe, if any? Is there a possible solution? What might that solution look like? You can understand the concern of Western countries to say, well, if we were just simply to accept, the millions of hundreds of thousands of refugees that have left Syria, that's not a feasible solution. What is a humanitarian and political solution look like, Lina?
The solution is simply, which is very complex, of course, to find a settlement for the Syrian conflict. Because no matter how many migrants are absorbed into different European countries, the flow will continue as long as this conflict goes on. And so this goes back to finding a political compromise that involves people from the Syrian opposition as well as those people from the Syrian regime who are open to compromise, to sit around the table and create a transitional government. But for that to happen, you need to get the regional stakeholders to agree, mainly Saudi Arabia and Iran. They have given some signs that they are interested in such a solution, but this needs the blessing of the Western community, especially the United States. Until the United States acts decisively in that direction, unfortunately, Europe will continue to bear the brunt of the migrant crisis, and the Syrian people are the first to suffer.
And Ishaan, finally, is it possible to have a solution to the refugee and migrant crisis without solving the Syrian civil war right now?
Of course, you won't stop the flow without some meaningful settlement in the region. A lot of Syrian refugees say that they have no desire to leave their country; they just have no choice. But at the same time, there is a crisis. These people are in dire circumstances, and fretting more about the solution instead of immediately mitigating the circumstances of these refugees is also a bit unfair.
All right, thank you very much, Lina, Khatib, and Ishaan Tharoor, for your insight and analysis on that. You're watching Roadmap on Shift by MSNBC. We're going to be right back after the break.
Nerding Out is unique in the sense that because it is not on TV, because it is a digital show, we can go longer and deeper into the weeds and get really wonky and nerdy around a range of issues. We can go really deep and have some fun with it as well. I hope viewers will watch Nerding Out and feel like they took a smart pill. I am a very nerdy academic. I love teaching and I love my students in the classroom. The great thing about having a show on Shift is my classroom is much larger. It's fun, I get to still do what I have been doing in terms of teaching, but I just have a larger classroom. I have so many dream guests, dead or alive. Frankly, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he was a prolific writer. No one reads his books. No one reads his in-depth analysis of what's happening in America. How do we understand the structure of the economy? How do we understand the structure of our political systems? I'd like to think the contribution to the discussion around racial inequality, policing, Black Lives Matter is more than sound bites. Many of the activists involved have been interviewed, say, for 2 or 3 minutes, but we spent an hour taking a deep dive into what are the main problems and causes of racially discriminatory policing today, and how are activists and ordinary people responding? How are they trying to reform and transform the criminal justice system, policing systems in cities across the country?
All right, Bernie Sanders took the lead over Hillary Clinton in New Hampshire this week, and that was a surprise to some. According to a new NBC News poll, it is the latest indicator of the Vermont senator's rapid rise on the campaign trail. Many of Sanders' views on the key issues that fuel his popularity, such as income and wealth inequality, corporate power, and big money in politics, can be found on his campaign website. However, there's one big hole that is not being addressed: foreign policy. There's no mention of his views on war or any other military topic, and many of his supporters have noticed it. A petition organized by rootsaction.org urges Sanders to address how militarism and corporate power are fueling each other, citing Martin Luther King Jr.'s stance on economic injustice and war. The petition, which has garnered over 25,000 signatures, directly challenges Sanders to tackle foreign policy issues in his run for the Democratic nomination. While voters can look to his record in the Senate, will Sanders come out on the issues as a candidate? In a rare glimpse of his foreign policy agenda, Sanders recently talked about how he would handle America's drone program as president. Take a listen.
Would you do away with the drone program? Because you have clearly had problems with that.
Arthur, what you can argue is that there are times and places where drone attacks have been effective. There are times and places where they have been absolutely counter-effective. I think we have to use drones very, very selectively and effectively. That has not always been the case.
In an interview yesterday in the Des Moines Register, Sanders said he has plans for a major speech on foreign policy, saying the omission of the topic from his website has been a matter of growing pains for his campaign. So the question now is, does Bernie Sanders have the potential to compete with other candidates like Hillary Clinton on foreign policy? Joining me now to discuss this is the coordinator of the rootsaction.org, Norman Solomon. Mr. Solomon, thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Let's start off with the issue of foreign policy for the Sanders campaign. Why do you think it's important for Bernie Sanders to address foreign policy, and specifically the issue of militarism, when right now his popularity is soaring without addressing them?
Well, it's absolutely crucial that Bernie Sanders make the connections between the policies that he wants domestically for economic and social equity in the United States and military spending. You know, the fact is that 54% of the discretionary budget of the United States government goes to the military. So all of the very strong and I think much needed proposals that Bernie Sanders has been making in terms of domestic improvements in our society are really held hostage to this enormous military spending.
How do you think he's come this far in the campaign, though, without having to address foreign policy? I mean, you know, has foreign policy played into the 2016 campaign in a critical way so far? It seems most people, I mean, you can look at like the Donald Trumps and you can look at the Bernie Sanders. Foreign policy has not really registered highly on their talking points.
Well, on the Democratic side, I think that Bernie Sanders' momentum has largely been fueled not only by his own very estimable qualities, but also the distinctions between him and Hillary Clinton, who is basically a Wall Street candidate, always been very tight with the biggest banks in the country. So Bernie Sanders has been able to make a sharp distinction, at least implicitly, between his genuine progressive populism, his support for the people, if you will, and Hillary Clinton's sort of flackery for corporate power. When you get to foreign policy, yes, Bernie Sanders' outlook and record is, if you will, better than Hillary Clinton, but that's a high jump over a low standard. It's a very low bar to be better than Hillary Clinton. And frankly, if the last few months now of this presidential campaign are any indication, there's not a huge distinction in the foreign policy prescriptions of Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. I think that's a tragedy because Bernie Sanders has distinguished himself historically already as a presidential candidate by going beyond the conventional wisdom, by speaking truth, not even so much to power as truth about power. And he's done that fabulously in terms of economic equity and social justice. He really has not done that very well so far anyway in terms of war and foreign policy.
We played a glimpse of his positions on drones recently. Are his recent comments on drones the direction you wish to see eventually from Bernie Sanders, at least as far as his foreign policy goes?
Well, in the 5 weeks since the rootsaction.org petition launched, Bernie Sanders has gradually, slowly been speaking a bit more about war and foreign policy. But the fact is his comments in the last couple of days about drones really are not that different than the enunciated position of President Obama. You know, be more effective and selective in use of drones. The fact is, though, A, you're going to kill innocent people with these drone strikes. It doesn't matter what sort of rhetoric comes from the government or any candidate. B, and perhaps equally or more important, there is ample record from people on the ground, including journalists who get to places such as the targeted areas of Pakistan and Yemen, that the U.S. government's drone program is, in effect, traumatizing and, if you will, terrorizing people in many communities. Millions of people who look up in the sky and there are drones 24/7 or at least for a protracted period of time, and they never know when their next minute, their next moment will be their last. So this should be totally unacceptable for any government that wants to oppose terrorism in this world.
Let me ask you about Senator Sanders' record when he was, or as a senator, I should say, to clarify. What does it say, his record, about the type of foreign policy decisions he might make if he were to get elected to the White House?
His record says that he's within the bounds of conventional wisdom of the Democratic Party on Capitol Hill. There's nothing wrong with conventional wisdom if it's wise, but when it comes to foreign policy, I think we can make an extremely convincing case that it's been anything but wise. It's been counterproductive. It's killed people overseas. It's created more enemies than it has killed, even if you want to go out and kill all the people in the world who don't like the United States, which is certainly impossible. So you look at Bernie Sanders' Senate record and House record before that. Yes, he voted against the Gulf War in '91 and the invasion of Iraq. In that vote in 2002. He did support the bombing of Serbia and Kosovo in 1999. He basically has upheld the escalation of U.S. bombing and warfare in Afghanistan during much of the Obama administration. So it's sort of a mixed record, and while Bernie will fight Wall Street, he doesn't seem really gung-ho to fight the military-industrial complex, which I think would disappoint, among other people, the famous Democratic chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, J. William Fulbright, or for that matter, the President Eisenhower, who warned us against that military-industrial complex.
And yet, despite some of these points that you've highlighted, do you still support Bernie Sanders for president?
I personally support Bernie Sanders for president. I think he's by far, overall, the best contender in the Democratic and Republican field, but it is critical support, and we have to be willing to speak out and speak up. I think that's what the RootsAction.org petition signers are all about. We've learned the hard way that if you just sign off on a presidential candidate and are not willing to challenge, you get the kind of dangerous policies that too often we've ended up with out of the Obama White House.
All right, thank you very much, Norman Solomon. We appreciate your insight for that, and certainly will be following that as well in the coming weeks.
Thank you.
A couple of weeks ago, Roadmap brought you the case of Laila and Arif Yunus, two activists who were convicted in Azerbaijan of several crimes, including fraud and tax evasion. According to several human rights organizations, they are part of a long list of activists, lawyers, and journalists that the government jailed in order to crush any opposition in the country. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights issued the following statement yesterday, saying, quote, "Despite my repeated calls to the highest state authorities, including the president himself, undue pressure, harassment, and intimidation against journalists, human rights defenders, and activists by state authorities continues to be reported in Azerbaijan." This comes just a week after a court in Baku sentenced Khadija Ismailova to 7.5 years in prison on charges of embezzlement, tax evasion, illegal entrepreneurship, and abuse of office. She is an investigative journalist who the UN believes was jailed because of her work reporting on human rights abuses and corruption in Azerbaijan. Now, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, Ismailova's arrest brings up the number of jailed journalists in the country to at least 9. And now the country is among the 10 most censored places in the world. The Azerbaijan embassy in the United States issued the following statement, quote, "Her conviction is stemming from the violations of the national legislation unrelated to her journalistic activities. At the same time, it is worth reminding everyone that Khadija Ismailova was convicted only by the court of the first instance. Azerbaijan has an established judiciary, and as any other citizen of Azerbaijan, she is entitled to challenge this decision respectively before the appeals court and Supreme Courts of Azerbaijan, which is a commonly accepted way of addressing potential legal grievances in democratic societies, including the United States." But human rights activists remain doubtful that the Yunus family or Ms. Ismailova might be released on that appeal. The UN and Human Rights Watch want Europe to stop turning a blind eye to the abuses that are happening in Azerbaijan.
European nations should, at minimum, stop negotiating a strategic partnership with Azerbaijan so long as this imprisonment of civil society continues. The Azerbaijani vote at the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe should be suspended. Until there are real costs like this, until Azerbaijan pays a price, it will continue to shut down human rights defenders in Azerbaijan. It's time for all these brave people to be freed and for civil society to flourish in Azerbaijan.
You're watching Roadmap on Shift Fan NBC. We're going to be right back after the break.
What makes the book report different from everything else? Well, it's about books. How many book shows are there out there anyway?
I think what makes my show different than anything that's on television right now is that I'm on it. I'm just kidding. We're kind of talking about pop culture in a way that is smart and fun.
The docket is unlike anything that's ever been on television or the web. It's like a legal variety show.
Nerding Out is unique in the sense that because it is not on TV, because it is a digital show, we can go longer and deeper into the weeds and get really wonky and nerdy around a range of issues.
We have the freedom to discuss the topics that may not be making the headlines, but certainly important enough to be shaping our world.
What we can do on the briefing is we have the ability to have a conversation. We are complete political junkies.
Changing America provides an inside look into the massive demographic changes that we're experiencing in this country and translating it.
So Greenhouse is different from most of the shows you'll find on TV because when it covers the environment, it does so with a sense of humor.
We really take sports from the larger perspective of why it matters. Why should we care? What are the issues that are affecting sports that actually affect all of us?
People right now are very interested in what reporters do. So that's what we try to do on our show, is kind of unpack, take apart the process of getting a story, covering a story, witnessing a story, being a witness to news.
It's fun, it's lively, it'll make you smarter, and it doesn't take itself too seriously.
All right, let's take a look at some of the stories that take us off the beaten path. This week, American rapper 50 Cent showed us that you can file for bankruptcy and still manage to buy a mansion in Africa. The rapper Curtis Jackson, who filed for bankruptcy weeks ago, bragged about his new African house on Instagram. 50 Cent decided to file for bankruptcy after being forced to pay $7 million in emotional damage for a sex tape he released back in 2008. Forbes magazine enlisted the rapper's net worth at $155 million. But Jackson says that his lavish lifestyle is in fact all a hoax. According to the New York Daily News, 50 Cent claims that all his fancy cars and jewelry were rented. If that is the case, I guess we will have to wait and see if this new pad will be returned as well. Now, Rick James once said cocaine is a hell of a drug, but what about 2CE? This drug caused massive hallucinations to members of the group of delegates at the Alternative Medicine Conference in Germany on Friday. The hallucinations must have been pretty bad since over 150 medical staff, ambulances, and police arrived at the scene. The 29 men and women were so overtaken by the drug that all interviews with the police had to be postponed till Monday, when everyone was fully recovered. Germany banned the LSD-like drug last year. Authorities are still investigating whether the convention delegates knowingly took the drugs or were perhaps victims of a prank. Here's the perfect present for all the Nutella lovers out there. Believe it or not, a German man by the name of Daniel Schobloch created a Nutella lock. Look at how the plastic case fits firmly on top of the Nutella jar. With a lock holding it in place, the inventor says he got inspired by his friend who constantly complained about his children stealing his hazelnut spread. Initially created as a joke, the item soon gained popularity, and almost 1,000 locks have now already been purchased on eBay. It is quite the investment for only $11.21. You can help put a stop to Nutella thieves in your home, or perhaps stop you from trying to break into your own jar. This next story takes technology to a whole new level. Picture this, a microscope made from a single sheet of paper that can be folded up to magnify more than 2,000 times their original size. We can all thank Stratford University engineer Manu Prekshaw for designing this high-powered microscope that costs less than $1 to make. He noticed the need for the foldoscope when remote clinics in Thailand were too afraid to use their high-tech microscopes for fear of damaging the expensive equipment. The origami-styled microscope can combat humidity and water, is extremely portable, and it won't break the budget. It also has smartphone-friendly and can record microscopic images by simply placing your phone over the eyepiece. This foldoscope will allow health workers in poor countries and inspire kids to explore their surroundings. So make sure you try to get your hands on one of those. You're watching Roadmap on Shift by MSNBC. We'll be right back after the break.
What can we do about the world's biggest challenges? How can one person change the planet? Join MSNBC and learn how to take action that can actually change the world. Share your photo for a chance to earn tickets to the Global Citizen Festival. Together, we can picture the change. Go to msnbc.com/globalcitizen for more information.
You disagree with me ideologically.
I do. It will be done again. We will do the facts.
There was no quid pro quo. There was no communication.
You could not answer.
Okay.
Hold on.
Fair
could
enough.
not answer.
You talk about political correctness run amok.
This is about human rights. Do not go there. Does anyone want to challenge me on that?
Morning Joe, weekdays 6 to 9 on MSNBC.
This is a huge deal. Think about where we are at right here. One of the most sweeping civil rights rulings in American history, certainly the biggest gay rights ruling ever in American history. A clear and resonant declaration by the majority of the court. People who say, this is the first step. No, this is something that's done. It's won.
You watch every day, right?
I do. It's great to be back on.
You gonna come in here, Tom?
No, this is it, kids. Thanks a lot for promoting the show.
We miss him in the Senate gym, too. He's one of the few people that actually worked out in the Senate gym. Everybody else was just there to watch Morning Joe.
Morning Joe, weekdays 6 to 9 on MSNBC.
Welcome back to Roadmap. Gaza could become uninhabitable by 2020 if current trends persist. That's according to a new report from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Over the past 6 years, Gaza has endured 3 military wars with little time in between to recover its economy and infrastructure. The report says that not only was development hindered, but actually reversed, a process called de-development. Lack of water and electricity, as well as an unemployment rate of 44%, are just some of the hardships that occupied Palestinian territories' 1.8 million inhabitants live through every day. Here to discuss the economic and humanitarian conditions in Gaza is the director of PalThink for Strategic Studies, Dr. Omar Shaban. Dr. Omar, thank you very much for joining us. He's joining us on the phone from Gaza. Do you agree that Gaza will be uninhabitable by 2020? And if you can give us a sense of how we got to this situation today.
First of all, thank you very much for hosting me. Yes, Gaza has been uninhabited not in 2020, but now. We should remember that in 2012, a couple of years ago, UN issued a previous report, Gaza 2020, and they put doubt that Gaza will be a suitable place to live. For those audience who don't know Gaza, Gaza is a very tiny place. It's a 360 kilometers square, around 200 miles, inhabited by 1.9 million people, almost 5 people per 1 meter square. 90% of the Gaza water resources are not good for drinking, very salty. The children are suffering from this water. The population growth in Gaza is one of the highest in the world, around 4.7. The average family member in Gaza is 6.2. There is no jobs. 75% of the Gaza population are under 20 years old. Gaza has been subjected to 8 years of a blockade and 3 wars in 5 years. Till now, 23,000 families, almost 110,000 members, are still homeless because their houses were destroyed in the last war, 2014. Having in mind another 1,000 families who lost their houses in 2008-2009 war are still in the waiting list. So the situation of Gaza in the current is very bad, is very black, and the youth in Gaza become more willing to be radicals comparing to the previous year, because there is no job, there is a lot of frustration, there is no hope.
Do you think there's a chance for recovery for Gaza? And if so, what are the conditions that would have to be met for that reconstruction to happen for the entire territory?
This is a very important issue. After the end of the war, last September 2014, the Donors Conference in Cairo on 12th of October last year pledged $5.7 billion. Half of them was supposed to be for the Gaza reconstruction. UN at that time introduced itself as a mediator to monitor the flow of the product, the construction material into Gaza. This mechanism was criticized by everybody because the UN replaced the Israeli siege. So Gaza now under the UN siege instead of the Israeli siege. The Israeli government is stopped to claim that they are sieging Gaza. Only 20% of the cement that is needed for Gaza reconstruction was allowed in a year. Gaza is in need for 1.5 million tons of cement, and most of this cement were sold in the black market. So the UN mechanism, which was supposed to prevent the cement and other construction material to reach to the military group, did not succeed. So we have to remove the whole siege and allow Gaza, normal Gaza, to build their houses and to build their land. Gaza is in need for 500 schools, and it's in need for 100,000 housing units, because for the past 8 years there was no reconstruction. So the only way for the youth in Gaza to have some income is to join the militia and the military groups. We have to give people in Gaza more hope and give more options, not only to be radicals. Gaza is a big prison where youth has nothing to do except joining the military and the militia and the radical group. And you people in Gaza cannot leave to Israel, cannot leave to Egypt because Rafah has closed, air is closed. Process. Oxfam and the Christian Aid and other NGO estimated that if the reconstruction of Gaza continue on the same level, Gaza is in need for 30 years, 30, to reconstruct what was destroyed in the last year.
Omar, how do you think Gaza's future looks like? I mean, I know you've been living there your whole life. I lived there for several years, and I see that every year it's getting worse and worse. What do you see as an actual political solution, given all of the challenges that you've highlighted? What needs to happen in the short term to actually find a solution to what Gaza is going through?
Ayman, I know you, I met you in Gaza, and you know Gaza very well, but things now in Gaza are much, much worse than when you were there a couple of years ago.
Right.
In the short, this is very good question. In the short term, we have to encourage Israel and Hamas to go for a truce of 10 years. We don't need another war, because there was a escalation between Israel and Hamas in the past 2 years, and we are, as a people, we are in the middle between the two. So we should encourage, the international community should encourage to have a truce between Israel and Hamas at least for 10 years. In this 10 years, the mentality of the people, the priority of the people will be changed. In Israel and in Gaza, people will be looking for something different. The second action which needs to be supported by the international community is to encourage the Palestinian reconciliation. We need to go for election. We need to have a new leadership, because our leadership are expired, either in the West Bank, BA, Palestinian Authority, or in Gaza, because the last parliament election happened in 2005 and was supposed to be finished by 2009. So all our political system is expired, is invalid. So Palestinian people need better leadership. So we need to encourage Palestinians to go for election where a new leadership can emerge, and this new leadership can negotiate or continue negotiation with Israel for a permanent peace settlement.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Omar Shaban, for your insight and analysis. You're watching Roadmap on Shift by MSNBC. We'll be right back after the break.
Who is my dream guest?
Man, that's a great question.
I'm much more interested in people who don't share my point of view than people who believe what I'm saying. And so I'm into Jim Inhofe at the moment because he's the biggest denier of climate change out there. Jim, I'd love to have you on the show.
I think right now at the top of my list is the Nobel Prize winning economist Joe Stiglitz. I would love to have him come on and just nerd out with me for an hour.
I would really like to interview the head of ISIS.
Her name is Beyonce Knowles, and she would be the #1 person that I would love to be on So Popular.
I would love to have a conversation with President Obama.
For the sake of the briefing being a political show, I would probably choose George Washington.
I'd like to interview Barbara Walters. I'd like to interview a woman who has been in this business for such a long time.
Arthur Ashe probably would be the one person I would love to have on the show.
I would have to say Mahatma Gandhi, because he was a lawyer, so on the docket we like to keep it legal. He would meet that criteria. He is from my country, he's Indian, and we share the same birthday. So Mahatma Gandhi, that's my choice.
Who would be my dream guest right now? Gore Vidal, also dead, and Salman Rushdie, not yet dead.
When we often talk about Gaza, the West Bank, or Palestinians, the conversation is usually centered around war, occupation, and conflict, as we just saw in our last report in Gaza. But a new fashion line is trying to turn the tables by combining Palestinian traditions with modern designs. The label, Untha, adds traditional Palestinian embroidery into Western clothes. 25-year-old Natalie Tahhan created these designs, and she joins us now from Tel Aviv. Natalie, welcome to the show. Let's start off with your inspiration. I mean, where did you get the inspiration for your fashion line to come from?
Hi Ayman, thanks for having me. Well, we look back at Palestinian heritage, and that's why we incorporate a lot of the Palestinian embroidery, like that's from 19th century, early 19th century. and we take that and try and blend it and incorporate it into a contemporary fashion sense.
Well, your label is having a lot of success. Can you tell us a little bit about that and who helped you make your dream come into reality?
We've actually been doing really well, alhamdulillah. I started this line with Al-Murtaqa Women's Organization, which is an NGO based in East Jerusalem. And they got a fund from the CRDP, which is the Community Resilience and Development Program for East Jerusalem, which comes under the UNDP. And through them, we were able to get funding to create this line and move forward and also create a fashion show in Jerusalem that was entirely made by people from East Jerusalem. So the garments were made in East Jerusalem, the fashion show itself, the photography, the models, everything was all based in East Jerusalem.
And as I understand it, you've been invited to a big fashion show. Can you tell us where people can see you next?
Right now, we're just showing locally, and we're hoping to do a charity gala dinner in East Jerusalem. But we're hoping to showcase internationally soon. The location is still undecided at the moment.
And talk to us a little bit about the work itself in terms of the embroidery. How are you, or the revenue that you generate from the sales of this, are you using them for purely, the development of the brand further, or are you involved or associated with any organizations and charities in East Jerusalem or with Palestinians?
Well, of course, a lot of the income that comes in goes back into the business, but essentially the reason why UNTA was really created was to create jobs for women in East Jerusalem, because the embroidery itself is a dying art. It's no longer within our homes and being passed down from mother to daughter. And so through this, we were able to employ women that were able to do the embroideries for us, and also it's something convenient for any stay-at-home mom that can just do it while raising her children and at her own convenience, and still be able to contribute to something that's being sold on a large scale.
And yeah, you talk about the significance of this. Why was it important for you, particularly as a Palestinian, to create this line? What does it mean for you on an individual level?
I just felt like the art is being lost, and it's no longer, around, and it's never really shared. It's always like a heritage type of thing. It's not shared, you don't see it on the high street, you don't see it in daily fashion, and so I thought it was, a nice opportunity to kind of celebrate our history and the language of embroidery itself.
All right, and do you have plans to sell some of your designs internationally as well? Is that taking off?
We're actually, we have some clients abroad. We're selling to the States and the UK and a lot of, the Gulf countries, Qatar and the UAE. So, we're branching out because I feel like it's important for the brand to be also on an international level, and for people to be, from abroad to be able to kind of understand what we're doing and why we're doing it as well at the same time.
All right, Natalie Tahhan, thank you very much for joining us. Good luck with your brand, and we wish you continued success. That's it for this edition of Roadmap. Thank you to our guests, and thank you for watching. We're on every Wednesday at 10 a.m. here on Shift. And, of course, you can catch all of our clips of our show on msnbc.com/roadmap. We'll see you next week, everyone.
I think what makes my show different than anything that's on television right now is that I'm on it. I'm just kidding. But no, seriously, I think it would be the fact that we're kind of talking about pop culture in a way that is smart, yet fun and witty and completely shady at times. I guess the number one thing I would want viewers to take away from watching Soap Popular would be that they feel that they see themselves, that they've been heard, and that more importantly, that the culture that they are entertained by actually makes them think. I grew up with a single mom with five of us in the household, and the TV was kind of the centerpiece. And so television enabled me to see myself and to also see the gaps in representation. And so being able to kind of have mirrors or access to mirrors showed me the power of where pop culture could be if it really was inclusive and diverse. And so what we do on So Popular is check those gaps and try to fill them as much as possible. My dream guest, her name is Beyonce Knowles. She's the woman that kind of really enabled me to see myself as a teenager when I was watching TV, when I was engaging as a fan of pop culture and music. Oftentimes when other shows talk about popular culture, they treat it as if it's a topic that is like a guilty pleasure, and we kind of center it as the access point for us to kind of talk about larger and broader issues like politics and identity and community and what it means about the work that we're doing and where we want to go and how we really see ourselves.